history of it, and what steps that we can take as students to prevent that and make sure we're aware about what's happening. Today we have, sorry, it's sucked out. Today we have our distinguished speaker, Deepali Kulkarni Ji. She's the Director of Human Rights at the Hindu American Foundation. She holds a master's in Asian religion from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and a master's in women studies from the University of Oxford, and a master's in religion from Syracuse University. Now I'll hand it over to Deepali.
Yeah, so namaste everybody. Thanks so much for making time to talk about this important topic today. So Shuji, you can go to the next slide. Today we're going to be talking about Hindu persecution in the context of Bangladesh. So this is 50 years since 1971, where during the Bangladesh Liberation War we saw the Bengali Hindu genocide. This was an instance, if you can go to the next slide. There were many Hindus that were persecuted, as well as, like with the Holocaust, individuals from other religious and ethnic communities that were also persecuted. A lot of you already know the history of Bangladesh, but just to recap, so we're all on the same page. India used to be one country. Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, those modern countries, used to be just one. In 1947, it split into two. And so it was India in the middle, and then we had East Pakistan and West Pakistan on the other side. In 1971, the Bengali people whereas today modern Bangladesh, were ready for some self-determination for a lot of reasons. In 1970, there was a Ebola cyclone, and 300,000 individuals died, and Pakistan government declined to send aid. It was far removed. They were trying to make Urdu the national language, which would make it hard for people to have jobs, engage in voting, and other public discourses. The Bengali language was really important to the Bengali people. And so this was, just one of the many reasons why they were ready to have their own country. So the idea was in 1947 that there was this two-country theory where Muslim individuals would go to Pakistan and kind of everyone else would be left in India. In 1971, all of a sudden, Bangladesh kind of in many ways made the two-country theory move because now there were three countries. So with the third country of Bangladesh, we saw that a lot of the things that were happening in Pakistan in terms of the ethnic discrimination towards Bengalis came to a head in the Bangladesh Liberation War. So in March 20, they were planning on declaring independence on March 26th. There was a democratic election, and they were ready to actually have their own country. The officials that they elected would have made that possible. So there was going to be a peaceful transition, right? A new government would be formed, and it was happening democratically and in a way that would have been smooth and without any bloodshed. But the Pakistan government, in a show of force, in the late hours of March 25th, technically a day before Bangladesh wanted to declare independence, they started Operation Searchlight, one of three operations that created a genocide against Hindus in Bangladesh. They started at Jagannath Hall, as well as a nearby mandir. Thousands were killed on that first night. Hindus were targeted for a variety of reasons, including because of this conflation with Hindu identity and Bengali identity and Indian identity. And this was really, really, foolish in one sense, if you don't mind me saying, because the majority of Bengalis in that area were Muslim. But there became this intentional targeting of Hindus. We can go to the next slide. So Hindus were targeted in a variety of ways that created this atmosphere of terror. And we know that from Indian government records, approximately 10 million individuals crossed over to the border in India looking for shelter. they went to refugee camps, and the situation wasn't great. Not because the Indian government was creating a hostile situation, but because millions of people were going into confined spaces, which bred disease, as we all know from coronavirus. I'm a little distance from you, so I'm not wearing a mask at the moment, so everyone can hear me. But we know that diseases spread when we're in confined spaces. There was starvation, and many people died just in the refugee camps alone. They were coming across the border with whatever they had. They literally just had to take what they have and leave. They weren't necessarily, people that were of means. They weren't political refugees. And that's really important to note. This was noted by Arthur K. Blood, the then Consulate General in Bangladesh, who said that, they were being targeted specifically because they were Hindu. He, was working in the consular office in Dhaka and saw the Hindus being persecuted. Many had to wear a yellow patch marked H to designate them as Hindus. Him and his wife were able to hide some Hindus in their homes. And he wrote messages to the US government, informing them of what was happening. And this is all recorded in the book, The Blood Telegram by Gary Bass. I definitely recommend you give it a quick read in case you want more information about this topic, because when there are instances of Hindu persecution, it's not like nobody knows. Unfortunately, that's a nervous laugh, it's not funny. It's horrifying that the world was aware of what was happening. This conversation did take place in the United Nations, but the actions that were taken by the international community were very few until it was too late. Go to the next slide. So here you see a line of women waiting in the refugee camps, and you can see what exactly their situation was. They were in the most dire of circumstances, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the instrument of surrender was signed in December after a 13-day war, the Indo-Pakistan War. So when the Indian government got involved, then all of a sudden there was that international support needed, but that happened 9.5, 10 months after the genocide had actually begun. So this instrument of surrender was signed by the Pakistan military, and now Bangladesh was its own government. Go to the next slide. But in the meantime, we know that approximately 3 million people died. It's impossible to know the exact number, and I want to make that clear. Just like with the Holocaust, there were no official records of how many were killed, and those records that did exist were promptly destroyed by the perpetrators. So we cannot know. But we know that Hindus were particular targets, to the point that they would literally check if a male was circumcised or not before killing him. Hindu families would try to pass as Christian or Muslim to make sure that they were not killed by putting sacred images, by making sure that they could recite the right prayers, and trying to pass as something they weren't to save their lives. We know that 200,000 to 400,000 women were raped, but again, we don't know the exact number. These estimates come from a variety of places. 10 million is from the Indian government. 200,000 to 400,000 is by a European doctor that came to perform abortions after the Bangladesh Liberation War took place, because of the huge number of women that were carrying babies from the rape. There were also many other forms of violence, and that has continued into what Bangladesh has become today. This legacy of violence in Bangladesh and the subcontinent continues until today. And the reason we need to remember this is, obviously it feels bad. As the director of human rights, I do a lot of work that It makes people feel bad. There's nothing feel good in this to recount horrifying human rights violations, especially against Hindus. But the reason we need to do this is first to remember the lost. These human beings died, and whether they were Hindu, Muslim, Christian, or Buddhist, they need to be remembered. They should not be forgotten. We should also celebrate survivors. There are survivors of that genocide today. And if you're from the Bangladeshi or Bengali community, you may know some of them. The children of survivors carry those same intergenerational traumas. We need to support them, and we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Next slide. So there's several things that you can do about this, and I'm going to talk more about more concrete actions that we can take, but I'll talk just about two of them right now. If you are a family member of a victim, or if you know somebody, there's nobody that was alive in 1971 here, I think. But if you know of somebody who is a family member of a victim, or if you know a victim of the Bengali Hindu genocide, there's a digital archive where we're trying to collect stories of victims so that we can remember the past. It's so important to remember the past so history doesn't repeat itself. So please go to genocide1971.com, click on digital archive, and have individuals that are victims share their story if they're comfortable. Next. If you're an artist from any community, whether you whatever regional or linguistic differences there are, whether you're Gujarati, whether you're from Kashmir or from Karnataka, if you're an artist, go ahead and submit your artwork to this community art project. Whether it's sculpting, singing songs, or anything else, it's really important that we do the difficult work of commemorating this genocide, to remember those that were lost and celebrate survivors. Because if we don't, then those instances of severe human rights violations will continue. And so this is one way of letting the survivors know, and the families of survivors know, that we see them, and we don't want this to happen again. Next thing. So what you can all do right now is go on your phone, and in your web app, type in genocide1971.com. Go ahead. So here you'll see a commemoration portal with a lot more information about the details of this genocide, how it happened, some official documents that actually provide these details, and a lot more. You'll also see some victim accounts, so we can hear firsthand from people that were there in 1971 what exactly took place. Please take time to educate yourself. Today, this year, 50 years after the genocide took place, this is the time. If not now, then when? Will we educate ourselves and educate others about what took place? Next slide. So this is not something that just happened in the past. The Bangladesh government, at the onset, intended to be secular, and it quickly became an Islamist country. In this space, minorities such as Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, are regularly persecuted. In October 2021, we saw an escalation of violence that took place on a yearly basis. The very important celebration of Durga Puja escalated into a very violent persecution of Hindus across the country. These are some estimates of the numbers killed, the women raped, the Hindu temples vandalized, and the Hindu homes attacked. The Bangladesh government said that no temples were destroyed. No women were raped. Two Hindus died, one from natural causes, and one from jumping into a pond. The denial from the Bangladesh government is staggering. And in light of that, we hope that now that the violence has escalated to such a dramatic level, the international community will finally see what has been the ongoing persecution of Hindus in the country. Next slide, please. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about how this violence started. And then I'd like to talk about what exactly can we do today to actually take action and prevent this. But first, I'd like to see, does anybody have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Just out of curiosity, how far back does Hindu persecution go? I know I've heard about Sikandar, the iconoclast, and Alauddin Khilji. Do you have any other context of like how far back this goes?
Yeah, so the question was, how far back does the persecution of Hindus go?
Yeah.
That's a very, very important question, and I think we have to take it on the basis of within specific areas and countries, because it's different from different areas and countries. And so we know that there, the different invaders in the Indian subcontinent persecuted Hindus because they were the people that were there that they were trying to control. They developed ways of understanding them that were pejorative, and they treated them in ways that were violent. We know that has happened for hundreds of years. But in different places, the persecution of Hindus happened at different times. One of the countries that has a lot of persecution of Hindus is Malaysia. And, the time that Hindus came there is different than when Hindus came to Fiji or Papua New Guinea. So persecution of Hindus started at different points in these different places. But we know that this has been an ongoing problem for hundreds of years. And now is the time for the Hindu community to step up and peacefully resist against these human rights violations. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. And I guess, I guess from what I read, it started off with Muhammad Ghori, and it could be from like 800.
I mean, even before that, there was certainly.
So it's been about 1,000 years, you would say, like.
Yeah, I would hesitate to put a specific start on it, but I think we can plan for a specific end to it. Let's say, because I think thinking of a community as persecuted is not necessarily useful. I know that that's how, a lot of forms of modern advocacy take place, is thinking of a community as always victims. And that's not something that an idea I want to perpetuate for Hindus, and I think that's why many Hindus are hesitant to identify Hindus as victims, because that's not how we want to live our lives. We don't want to always be victims. And so, this idea that, Hindus have been persecuted for a long time, definitely, there has been persecution for a long time, but kind of perpetuating the idea that Hindus have always been persecuted, I think, is not really in line with how most Hindus want to live their lives. I'm going to talk more about this violence now, and then we'll come back to more questions later. So Durga Puja was happening in Bangladesh, and the way that happens is there's mandaps or bundles, and there's murtis of Durga Mata, and even in the entrances there's additional murtis. It's really beautiful mandaps that are just put up for the celebration of Durga Puja. We all know what puja entails, offering things to the goddess or god, singing bhajans, eating delicious, prasad with our families. That's what puja includes. It's a peaceful celebration that wasn't hurting anyone. Every year, Durga mandaps have been attacked. They've been destroyed, vandalized, and really the key word is desecrated. They took a sacred place and attacked it and made it not a sacred place anymore. This is something that happens every year, but this is something that, like this, in October 2021, I don't know if you can still see me with Facebook Live, things escalated dramatically. So you can go to the next slide. So it started in Gumila city. Essentially, there was a Quran placed in a murti of Hanumanji's lap. So he was in his typical position, right? Hanumanji's, position of reverence towards Ram Bhagwan and Sita Mata. So in his lap, a Quran was placed. And this was posted on Facebook. This Facebook post started violence in the city of Urbana. We later learned from CCTV recordings that this was placed there by a Muslim individual called Iqbal Hussain. And he also took a club, took Hanumanji's club from that space. So we know that it wasn't an act of respect, which it would have been. If we had put something on or near Hanumanji as a Hindu, it would have been a sign of respect, certainly if it was a scripture of any kind. But that's not what was happening here. It seemed to be intended to insult that space. But what ended up happening was that Muslim individuals from around Kumla city saw this as an act of blasphemy or insult to Islam, insult to the Quran. Even though it wasn't done by a Hindu individual, it was attributed to Hindus. And the attacks began. Next slide, please. So the attacks were manifold, and we know this, from the Hindu American Foundation's partners on the ground in Bangladesh. The real extent of the violence was quite severe. Next slide, please. We know that numerous mandaps were destroyed, and so the violence that started in one place was purposefully put on social media, and it fomented violence across the country. So that now in numerous districts and numerous towns and cities, mandaps and pandals were being vandalized for a perceived slight against a religion that wasn't actually so. And it's laughable, it's horrifying. The way in which this misinformation started on social media and created this opportunity for violence. It instigated violence, and those individuals that actually shared the violence of what was happening online, Hindu individuals that were merely saying, look, this is what happened, sharing a photo or sharing a video, this is what's happening in my city. Something that we would certainly all do, right? If that was happening to us, we might want to share what was happening close by. Next slide, please. But what ended up happening was that those Hindu individuals that shared information about the violence that was ongoing on their social media accounts were arrested by the Rapid Action Battalion in Bangladesh. These arrests were made because they were destroying communal harmony. While the perpetrators have yet to be brought to justice, numerous Hindu individuals are now being persecuted by the Bangladesh government for sharing information online. They didn't hurt anyone. They didn't try and insult Muslim sentiments. They were simply speaking out against a very real violence that was taking place very close to them. Next slide. So there's a variety of things we can do, and I'm going to start by just sharing a few of those now. You can all go to hinduamerican.org. We're going to start taking action against this violence. Next slide. So once you go to hinduamerican.org, you're going to see these three lines at the top, the white lines. Click on that. Next slide. All right, so everybody's clicked on the white lines, correct? All right, so now it says get involved. Don't click on that, all right? So look up here. Click on this little carrot right here, next to get involved. You clicked on get involved, go back and click on this carrot instead. Go ahead. So everybody's gotten to this point, right? Click on take action. Anybody having trouble? Okay, and then next slide. All right, so the first one is about the Save Pakistan Stolen Girls campaign. I'll get to that in a little bit, but right now I want to focus on Bangladesh. So if you scroll down, you're going to see the first one with the Bangladesh flag, and it says, it's a letter to Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina asking her to release Hindu prisoners of conscience. So the prisoners of conscience are the ones that I just mentioned, the Hindus that were arrested for just sharing information online. They didn't do anything, they didn't hurt anyone, they shared information online, And that was the perceived slight against the communal harmony, not the actual physical violence that took place against the Hindus. So anybody can sign this letter. I'd like everybody to click on this now, and then next slide, and go ahead and give it a quick read. Once you have, you're going to scroll to the bottom and you can input your information here. It asks for your home information. That's just so we can confirm this is like a real person and multiple people don't sign the letter, with different names. We need individual real people to sign this letter. Only your name will be included. If you want to sign this letter, please do, and then send it to 20 people. I'll also show you something else we can sign in relation to Bangladesh. So I'm going to give everybody a minute to read over the letter, see if it's worth signing, and if so, go ahead and sign your name. Anybody around the world can do this. This petition letter is going to be up until November 17th. So like I said, please ask everyone you know to actually sign on to this. The more, the better. The more from a variety of communities, the better. We need not just Hindu support at the Hindu American Foundation for these Hindu issues. We need support from all communities in the United States and from around the world to come out and actually speak for Hindus, because persecution of any community is a problem for all communities. Next slide. Or actually, can you go back 2 slides? Yeah. So if you go back, once you've signed onto this petition letter, if you choose, you can also urge Congress to condemn Hindu persecution in Bangladesh. This is only for people currently in the United States, so obviously this all applies to you. Basically, we're going to ask members of Congress to make statements, public statements, condemning this violence. This is super important because the Bangladesh government, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, denied that any of this violence took place. So actually having government officials from the US and other countries is really important to confirm that, to confirm, to recognize that the violence took place, because if there's complete denial that it took place, obviously it's going to continue. So if you click on this, similar to the other one, you'll be able to sign, but when you sign at the bottom, something different is going to happen. It won't sign onto a letter. It'll actually send an email to your elected official for wherever you live. And you may even get a response back. So it's going to send a message to your elected official. This is something that you could do regardless of where you live in the United States. So once you're done, take a look at this, and once you're done signing on to it, you just have to be physically in the United States in order to do that. If for the US, send this to 20 people in the US, send this to 20 people anywhere in the world, and make sure that there's concrete action being taken on these issues of violence. If we remember the violence without taking action, what are we really doing other than making ourselves feel bad? We need to actually stop the violence where it's happening now. So I'm going to give you guys a minute or so to go ahead and look at the statement to ask your Congress member to condemn Hindu persecution in Bangladesh as well, and send it to 20 people. everybody's filled it out and sent it to at least 20 people? While you guys are finishing that up, I want to take a second to talk about the Hindu American Foundation where I work. Hindu American Foundation was started in 2003. It's a nonpartisan, nonprofit advocacy organization. So we educate about Hindus and Hinduism and advocate for Hindus in the United States as well as elsewhere in the world where we're minorities. I started in just January, but since then I've got an idea of the full scope of all the work that HEF does. Somebody asked me earlier today, how did you start focusing on Bangladesh? And I started focusing on Bangladesh as soon as I started working at HEF because that's one of the places where Hindus are most persecuted, but that's not all. This year we also launched our Save Pakistan Stolen Girls campaign where we are trying to prevent the abductions of Hindu and Christian girls, where they are abducted, forced to convert, forced to marry, and then forced to live with their abductors. Sometimes they're put in government shelters so that they can, if they're raped and are with child, they can carry out their pregnancies. And then also many girls are also sold into sexual slavery in neighboring countries such as China and Iran. So this is a huge problem that affects the Hindu community in Pakistan, which are really, in a difficult position because they're very persecuted, and it's not just Hindus, but Christians, Ahmadiyya Muslims, and others in Pakistan that are regularly being persecuted. Sunni Muslims are another group that are actively being persecuted by the Pakistani government. So if you go to our website, you'll see that we put out annual reports on a variety of countries that have minorities and are persecuting the Hindus in their country. But the Hindu American Foundation does a lot of work, and a majority of it is in the United States. Whether it's educating about the swastika and making sure it's not taught as a symbol of hate in New York and other states, or making sure that textbooks accurately represent actually what Hindus believe. There's a whole host of issues that the Hindu American Foundation is actively working on to make sure that people understand about Hindus and Hinduism.